And can I welcome our panelists to the stage? It's always tough following Dan Runde, but I'm going to use an old saw here about what are the two biggest fibs in the world. The check is in the mail, and I'm here from Washington and here to help you. So we've got 4 people here from Washington to sort of enlighten this discussion on this issue of collaboration in critical areas or difficult areas to do business. And this is my 4th time speaking at Stanford. The last 2 times, I feel like the Flying Dutchman because I was here, if some of you may remember, there was a Global Innovation Summit here about, I guess maybe 12 years ago. President Obama was the keynote speaker, and it was right at the weekend where the British voted to leave the European Union. And I remember being in an auditorium with President Obama speaking as if his best friend had died because he had invested a lot of energy and interest in trying to preserve the England to the British to the European Union. The second time, most recent time, I was invited by a hero of mine, George Shultz, to come out and speak with a number of luminaries, Chet Crocker, George Moose, Jack Goldsmith, about the future of Africa, and I was there to address the issue of trade. And it was just an honor to be in the presence of George Shultz. This was maybe a year or so before he had passed. And it was a wonderful moment, but it was like 3 or 4 weeks before COVID hit. So I hope that my presence here isn't going to bring further bad news to the global stage. But I think the reason that David and I, and thank you, David, thank you to Cobalt, and thank you for Stanford and this wonderful facility for hosting us here today. And we played around with this topic, and the topic really is really drawn from a comment that many of you in the industry would know, Ro Dewan, who is the CEO of the International Council of Mines and Metals, who made a comment a couple of years ago at the PDAC conference in Canada, which really stuck in my mind. And he said about 50% of the global supply or potential supply of critical minerals are in areas that are prone or subject to conflict. And so we have to navigate a way forward in dealing in some very difficult geographies. And we just heard about this here in Ukraine. I've built most of my career in Africa, some in the Middle East, and a little bit of Eastern Europe. Many of these are tough geographies to do business. But I think this sort of sets the stage for this discussion. I've brought 3 people that I've known for many years and I respect greatly to discuss this topic. And I'd like to start it off maybe at sort of with the sense of how vulnerable are we in this area of critical minerals. And Mahnaz and her group, the Silverado Policy Accelerator, I'll ask her to tell us a little bit about Silverado because it's probably not a commonly known institution out here, has done really great work in assembling not only data and analysis, but convening really thought leaders and industry leaders in Washington to try to guide us forward in terms of developing effective strategies to be able to secure our supply chains of critical minerals and rare earths. So I'd like to turn it over first to Mahnaz to give us a bit of an overview, if you would, on how critical is this situation for us in the United States in terms of securing our supply chains, and why is it so important?
Thank you so much, Tony.
Yeah, you're right.
Again, my name is Mahnaz Khan. I'm the VP of Policy at Silverado Policy Accelerator. And so we are a very small, scrappy, relatively new think tank. We take a data-driven approach, and all of our recommendations are formulated from business input. And since we've all, on the policy side, have worked inside government, myself, I've worked at all 3 trade agencies for 14 years, we look at granular policy implementation. So recommendations may be great, but we want to make sure that it's politically viable and that it can be done from the inside. So Tony, to your question, when we talk about China, I think everybody in this room knows how vulnerable we are to China. And I always say that there's 4 pillars of how we can get ourselves out of this. One is mining, processing, mineral recovery, which is recycling, and innovation. So on all those fronts, China outmines us in mineral-rich regions such as Africa, outprocess us in their own countries. They out-recycle us, and they out-innovate us. But places like Stanford, I think, are very good on that front on trying to tackle China this way. So the first question, I came into this job about 1.5 years ago. The first question I asked is, of all these critical minerals, there's 50 of them, which one is the most critical? I like organization and groupings. So what I did is I went to our research team and said, can you do a threat analysis on all these critical minerals? There's 3 different lists. It's very confusing. And so they did. We started off with the DoD list because those are the critical minerals that are most vital for national security. And then we went to the USG list. So if you cross-reference those, there's 32 critical minerals, and we did a threat index on every single critical mineral based on the net import reliance, our net import reliance on China and Russia, and China's share of global processing and mining worldwide. And so I think I had a chart up there, but we call these strategic defense critical minerals. So these are the ones that we are importing from China and Russia, mainly China, in process form into the United States. So we went to the Hill, we go to the administration, we have this chart. And what we find is that China has export bans and export controls on 11 of the 12 strategic defense critical minerals. That's scary because that means China knows where to hit us. They include minerals used in semiconductors, indium, arsenic, gallium, germanium, tantalum. It also includes minerals used in ammunition, such as bismuth and antimony. All those missiles that are flying around right now in the Middle East, that is graphite and graphite, tantalum, tungsten are in those. And then, of course, rare earths. Rare earths has been weaponized for the last 15 years and will continue to be, and so we have rare earths, yttrium, and scandium on that list. So I think this most recent fiasco with the rare earths export controls, that was a long time coming. It's been 15 years. Some people forget in the Trump 1 strategy, Trump 1 administration, that China imposed 25% tariffs on rare earths, and there was a phase 1 agreement. It's happening again. This is the third time, and we need to learn our lesson. Now at Silverado, we don't just like to highlight the problem, we also like to highlight solutions. What we are advocating for is a Quad Plus strategy. So people ask why Quad? Quad is odd in this situation, but it's really because this administration has stated in their Unleashing American Energy order that they want to use Quad for critical minerals. And then Secretary Rubio, one day after the inauguration, had a Quad meeting and stated that he wants to use it for resilient supply chains. Now, what we are advocating for at Silverado is a Quad Plus trade agreement, a real trade agreement. Not just another partnership, but a real trade agreement. Now, what's the plus in this? These are plus partners. That includes developing countries, such as Africa, and developed countries. And why do we need this? It's because really we need to move the supply chains quickly. The president wants to do 90 deals in 90 days, and there's no other way to do it unless we have a real framework for a trade agreement. Now, when we're talking about minerals, Africa, specifically with Africa, what we call dual use or battery minerals, that's really where Africa sits in the center of. With cobalt, 76% of cobalt mining occurs in the DRC. China processes 80%. With manganese, the manganese is South Africa, Gabon, and Ghana. That's 64%. China processes about 80 to 90%, depending on the metal. Also with graphite, Mozambique and Madagascar are 10%. And then lithium. People, when they think of lithium, they think of the lithium triangle in South America and Australia, but Zimbabwe also produces about 9%, actually more than Argentina. So what's a Quad Plus agreement? We need real incentives. Everyone's talking about 30D being taken off. We can put the 30D incentives back into a trade agreement, and we can do it not just for EVs, because this administration is not very politically for EVs, but also for AI, for quantum computing. We can add in infrastructure financing. China has a pit-to-port strategy. We need a pit-to-port strategy as well. When I worked at USTR, all the developing country partners say China comes with a bag of cash. We come with a bag of complaints. So we need to come with a bag of cash also with our allies as well, and also other beneficial tariff structures. So I think that's what we're looking at. Happy to elaborate further on that, but that's basically the model that we're looking for. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Scott Woodard is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Supply Chain Competitiveness and, one more, Scott? Supply Chain Competitiveness and Energy?
In the Bureau of Energy.
In the Bureau of Energy,
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. And Scott, we have identified a problem. We've seen a sort of sliver of that problem in Dan and the minister's discussion on Ukraine. But how are we responding to this vulnerability that we have? What is the U.S. government undertaking? I guess you're put on the spot because you're not only representing the Department of State, but also the myriad constellation of U.S. agencies that also have skin in this game. So perhaps create a little bit of the picture for us of what the U.S. government is trying to do to respond to this.
Sure, I'll do my best. First, thanks for having me out here. It's great to be out on the other coast for a change. Your conference rooms are nicer with natural light than we have on the East Coast.
I'm used to coffee.
Yeah, I'm used to just doing this under fluorescent lights in some dark cavern of a room, so it's actually nice to be able to see real sunlight while I'm doing this. So thanks to Cobalt Mineral X for having us out here. Sure, so I think the way we tend to portray the problem, we see it as a two-pronged problem, right? You have first, we need to figure out how to get more minerals out of the ground in general. If you want to achieve, what this administration wants to in kind of restoring American manufacturing, if you want to do more stuff, there's only two ways to get more stuff, right? You either have to grow it or you have to dig it out of the ground. And so by increasing the overall amount of minerals that we're able to mine and process is really critical for developing the kind of modern, successful, prosperous economy that I think we want in this country. And the second prong of the problem is that we have to diversify the supply chains away from China. I think you heard Mahnaz describe pretty accurately how dependent these supply chains currently are, especially in processing. The rocks are where the rocks are, and that's spread around all corners of the globe. But for a variety of kind of policy and economic and, well, let's just call it kind of laziness reasons over the past several decades, China has been able to pursue a strategy of really concentrating the processing of many, many minerals. So what is the U.S. government kind of doing about this? Well, we're trying to do a number of things. The president has issued, depending on how you want to count them, 5, 6, 7, 8 executive orders on minerals or related to minerals in one way or another. And so I think it's fair to say that this administration is fully committed to doing a number of things that ameliorate the situation that we see right now. For example, processing, permitting sort of on mines. The United States, it takes 29 years to open up a new mine here in the United States because of a variety of permitting and processing reasons. That makes us like one of the second longest duration for trying to open a mine anywhere in the world. But even if you go to the fastest jurisdiction in the world, which I think is Laos on the last chart that I saw, it still takes 9 to 10 years. So even then, you're looking at a longer term situation when you're looking at opening up a new mine. The processing and pushing processing in the United States, I think, is more of a shorter term kind of gambit. And that's what the administration is also really focusing on right now. And we're doing that through various programs and incentives offered through a lot of different agencies. So I'll go through some of them, not in full detail because that would be really cruel to all of you, but I'll just hit the highlights of some of them. So, for example, the Department of Energy. Department of Energy is focused especially on domestic programs, and they have a large office that can dispense money, and they have chosen to focus on a lot of technology-related things. So companies that are looking through kind of the coal ash tailings or coal ash heaps that we've accumulated in the United States over the last 100 years. There are a lot of potentially useful minerals in those sort of trash piles, for lack of a better word. And a lot of companies are finding those things, and DOE is trying to help them do that. And we have the Department of Commerce. So it has, through programs like what we call Select USA, which is a program for trying to encourage foreign investment into the United States. That's in partnership with the Department of State, which is my home institution. We are looking at actively trying to drive foreign investment into these kinds of, especially processing and or mining projects in the United States. Department of State is doing a number of things. One, we're focusing on this issue, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's something we haven't really done historically. But now, when we talk with the private sector, there's a number of companies that are very interested in looking at places like the DRC or Zambia or elsewhere. And what they tell us is if the host government knows that Uncle Sam is interested and is actively helping, that actually can make it a lot easier for that company to kind of get what it needs and not get pushed around by local tax authorities or other kind of bureaucratic busybodies as they're trying to do their projects there. So we've been told in no uncertain terms by the administration to be very helpful to those U.S. companies that are active on the ground in places around the world, and so we are doing that. Department of Defense, also very active, particularly on, say, rare earth processing. So they've supported a couple of companies. Mountain Pass, of course, is the one that's been working for a long time in the United States and now wants to go all the way from mine all the way up to magnets. So they've received some significant funding from DoD under what we call Title III of the Defense Production Act. Another company called Linus also has received money for that. So the DoD is also very active in this space. There are also other parts of DoD that even I'm still finding out, like on a daily basis, that have money for various minerals projects, because I think our defense industrial base really understands the importance of how fairly small quantities of some fairly obscure minerals are actually critically important for a number of defense-related products. So then we have our traditional kind of public finance institutions like DFC, XM, and USTDA. So that's DFC, that's the International Development Finance Corporation. That's the XM Bank, and that's the U.S. Trade and Development Authority. So XM has reintroduced a product that they call the Supply Chain Resiliency Initiative. Now, this is a kind of a loan product that we invented originally back in the 50s to help support the development of uranium mining in South Africa. Then for a variety of reasons, it kind of went away, and we've brought that back now. So now for the first time in decades, the Export-Import Bank is able, through this tool, to fund a mining or processing project in a third country as long as that comes back to the United States in the form of offtake or some finished good later on in the chain. So that's an exciting new product that has a lot of support in Washington, and XM has issued a number of letters of interest already for those projects. The DFC, you heard a little bit about that when we were talking about Ukraine. The DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, is for the U.S. government how we interact with that U.S.-Ukraine. It was originally in the popular press called kind of a minerals agreement, but as you heard, it's developed into something different. It's really more of a U.S.-Ukraine reconstruction partnership for, especially when the war ends. It's a facility for how the U.S. and Ukraine are going to work together to help rebuild Ukraine. And the DFC is that part of the U.S. government that is interacting with Ukraine on that partnership. And then on its own, DFC is very active in the mineral space in general, including it can take equity stakes, which is a bit unusual for our public finance institutions. So it's taken an equity stake here and there in a number of projects, as well as some loans throughout Africa, especially, to encourage some of these projects that are seen as very risky and help bring them to fruition. And then USTDA, which is different because it actually engages much earlier in the process. Most of our public finance money, because mining projects are super risky, only 1 in 1,000 actually succeeds, and using the taxpayer money, so people are very nervous about using that. But USTDA gets involved much earlier doing feasibility studies, so they renewed a partnership with the African Development Bank, for example, which will help kind of promote earlier feasibility studies to help move some projects forward. So with that fairly exhaustive and kind of boring list gives you some sense of kind of what Uncle Sam is up to on this front. But I could say it's not enough, and it's not fast enough, and we all know that. And so we constantly are looking for ways of being kind of bigger and better, and how to serve the private sector, which is how ultimately the U.S. is going to figure this out, right? We're not going to out-China China. We're not going to kind of succeed by spending more on China. We're going to be able to out-innovate China. We're going to be able to move in ways that China can't, and develop relationships that I think China can't. I think that's ultimately where the U.S. government sees kind of this going, and how we're ultimately going to succeed on this.
Thanks, Scott. It was an exhaustive list. Appreciate that. I was really worried about our next speaker coming, because on Saturday I follow her on social media, and it's an active social media site, I can tell you that. And she was on the border of Botswana and South Africa on a safari. And I said to myself, wait a minute, she's supposed to be across the world on Tuesday morning for a panel. And lo and behold, yesterday I got a call from her as she arrives in Washington on her way to a White House meeting, a briefing, and then got here at midnight last night, so 2 a.m. last night. So Gracelin, many of you have come long distances, but Gracelin, I think, gets the star here. It scared the death out of me. But Scott, you raise a point that I reflect upon from a conversation and a presentation that I moderated a few years ago at the U.S. Institute of Peace with Moletsi and Becky. Now, unless you follow South Africa, you probably don't know who he is, but he's considered a real thought leader in South Africa. And the two things that stuck in my presentation about how we compete with China is that you're not really going to compete, as Scott said, in China in some of the sort of quantitative ways that they're out there. There are 10,000 Chinese companies operating in Africa. There are 600 in South Africa that are U.S. companies. I mean, their scale of engagement, from the shopkeeper all the way to the large mining and oil and gas companies, we're not going to replicate that. That's just not going to happen. But we do have our sweet spots. And I think our sweet spots are really our ability to deploy creative capital. Some of that was discussed in Scott's presentation about how the U.S. government is using newer tools or bringing back old tools to try to help mitigate risks, but also in technology. And this great technology institution and this forum is an example where we really do punch above our weight. We are not only great technology leaders, but we're probably more importantly the ability of sharing technology. And I think that's really where we are most competitive, is our willingness and ability to share technologies. And this institution, among many others in this country, really stand on a high ground for that. But I guess reflecting upon a very long career of seeing Africa be not consumed by China, but seeing China just really take over many industries and economic activities in Africa, it seems like we're playing checkers and they're playing chess when in terms of engagement in Africa. Now, that may have been a victim of history. That China's entry into the global economy was delayed for generations. I just read the biography of Chow En-lai. I would recommend it to all of you. It gives you an idea of the arc of China over the last almost 100 years. But the reality is that we are behind. And Gracelin, the tools that we're deploying that some of Scott mentioned, and maybe commercial tools that are also being utilized, are they fit for purpose for us to be able to solve this problem of being able to secure our supply chains and assure our economic competitiveness going forward?
Thanks so much. It was really nice to make it. I'm so sorry for stressing you out this morning. I got a text at 9 o'clock. He's going, hey, where are you? I was not here yet, but we just made it. So good to be here. Thank you to Mineralics for having me. Thank you to being on such a great panel of friends. We sit on panels together all the time, so I would vouch for the sunshine being a nice additive factor. To your question, Tony, I think there's two things. I think one is looking at the challenges the mining sector is facing. I think one of the biggest challenges we face right now, is actually our prices. In an environment where we're like, we know we need a lot of minerals, everybody agrees on it. It's one of the few bipartisan areas of consensus. Generally, if you're not copper and you're not gold, you're having a bad day on your prices. And how do you tackle prices is not a problem that our current policy toolkit is designed. If you think about it this way, like let's think about a blob of copper, right? 95% of the value of copper is taken when I take it out of the ground. to smelt copper, I'm essentially losing money. So in a capitalist society where people have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholder, there is no incentive to smelt copper here in the US right now. So what do? We take the excess of what we mine here at home and we send it to China. You can't solve that with an upfront CapEx sum of money, because reality is it's like an ongoing OpEx problem when you're operating cash negative. And there's no tool to design to do that. So some of our greatest challenges, right? I was on my way in, I was walking in, and there was a Washington Post journalist who's currently on like a field trip of rare earth mines around America. And he said, what do we do? Like, do we just commit to, for the next 50 years, subsidizing processing? I said, I don't really know, but at the same time, it is what China's doing, right? So expecting free market to work. I think Scott gave us such a good rundown of our financing instruments, and these are so important, right? When I look at DFC Equity, the one company that has DFC Equity, TechMet, I remember I asked Brian Manel, I said, why, we were doing a fireside, I said, why is equity important? He said, because when you have part government ownership, it's much easier to mobilize private capital in the masses, right? That little bit of government equity has a multiplier. Political risk insurance, incredibly important, because a lot of these mines are in hard places. But the reality is that there's no single financial tool that is going to get us out of where we are. It really is an all of the above approach. It is going to be risk insurance. It is going to be more equity because we haven't done enough of it, right? Brian always says we need 100 Brians, which I quite like, if you know Brian. And it's thinking about, how do we provide support now? I think one of the biggest questions we come back to with our colleagues in government is it, the government becoming the buyer of last resort? Like, is it a price floor? Is it an ongoing subsidy? What is it? And I think that is perhaps the most complicated question we have, and there's not, I'm just giving you problems, I don't have a solution. But that is what we are looking at now. And how much does it cost? Is it $1 billion or is it 10 billion?
Okay, great. Well, let's take some questions from the audience. I got it. Great. Well, thanks so much, Gracelin, and glad that you could make it. You never disappoint. Let me just say, before I get into the Q&A here, first of all, there are many Brians, and there are many future Brians in this room. Brian Manel was the first to step forward and be able to use these tools, but I think the collective knowledge and ambition that we find here today gives me hope that there is the prospect of having many Brians that are out there. So I'm just delighted to see this attendance here. But one of the institutions that I feel that's under threat is this great network of 17 national laboratories that we have established across the United States since the end of World War II. These institutions have created so much great research that has been able to improve our lives in every measure, whether it be in medicine or energy. Many of you know about the National Renewable Energy Laboratories in Golden, Colorado, at cutting edge in the development of new green technologies. And this administration has made a quite clear statement that there's not going to be a continued commitment at that level to our national laboratories. And I think that's a mistake. I think our national labs, maybe they could be run more efficiently, for sure. Many of these institutions need to be evaluated in terms of what they're delivering. But I really think that we're running in danger of losing what really is our competitive edge, and that is our research and capacity and our human development. And I just hope that what we take away from this will be at least a sense among all of us of the value of these institutions in whatever we're doing. So let me turn to the Q&A here. Let me see. Okay, Mahnaz, let's start with you. What role does poor information in the U.S. and other developed countries about difficult places? What role does poor information in the U.S. and other developed countries about difficult places to play? Meaning, we probably have an information deficit about how to engage in difficult geographies to do business. So tell us how we're sort of solving that problem of being able to develop more accurate information on the countries in which we're going to be doing mining exploration or production.
Well, I think there's two models where we can look at. I think I'm going to change the question around a little bit
please,
because
go
it's
ahead.
a little confusing.
You have the liberty of doing that.
Regarding information gaps, I think that we have to look at it from two models. This administration can do a government-led model, which is going into certain countries like Ukraine or Greenland, and then signaling to the business community that they want to do business there. So companies gain interest, and they gain the government support to enter. The second one that I prefer is really the business-led model. So these companies that are in Zambia or DRC, make a coalition and get together and then pitch to the White House what they need from that particular country. If they need more feasibility studies, if they need more, processing, value-added processing, then they can go. And then we see that model in the DRC already with this agreement that's coming up, but also in this partnership with Saudi. It seems like there was a lot of business interest behind that Saudi deal. And that's one way to do it. And I would say with information gaps, I think, Africa is a very mineral-rich region, and we, United States and their allies, need to do more processing there as well, not just in the United States. Although we have America first, we don't have America only policy. And I want to flag something that came out last week that didn't get a lot of attention, which was the statement that came out after the China-Africa Forum. And China said, we want to do more value added and processing within Africa. So that's a big deal that didn't raise a lot of flags. And they also stated that they want to help develop the Tanzania and Zambia railway. So again, they have this pit-to-port strategy. They've come to Africa with a bag of cash, and they are really hitting those difficult places, doing business in difficult places on all fronts: mining, processing, the recycling, and the innovation. So we need to, when we make an offering in these difficult places, we need to really look at all four of those spheres.
Thanks for that. And again, just as an illustration of the checkers versus chess analogy, is we are struggling to renew a very modest trade agreement with the United States and Africa, which I helped draft or advocate for 25 years ago, called the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which represents about 0.5% of our total imports. Okay, so this is not big-time stuff. We're wrestling with renewing that agreement. Just last week, the Chinese have said, for all countries in which we have diplomatic relations with Africa, all goods now are going to enter China duty-free. I mean, we're playing catch-up here in trying to renew a very modest agreement because it might set a precedent for trade liberalization that certain people in the administration don't like. And yet the Chinese are leaping ahead of us in their engagement at this level. This shows you that really we are behind. So, Scott, I'm not going to pin that on you. I'm going to ask, though, that many of these, maybe I am.
I think you just did.
All right, Scott, you've had to take arrows before, so you'll take them again. But my question is as follows, that many of these frameworks and negotiations on these country-specific agreements, including the ones in Ukraine that we discussed, are temporary, ephemeral, 2, 3, 4-year agreements. But the reality is that the mining cycle goes on for many, many years. So the question that was raised by the audience is, how durable is our commitment, the U.S. government commitment, to commitments overseas on these type of projects and investments, when in 3 years we might have a new administration, we might have new priorities that come up, other things happen. So I think the question is a fair one, is if we're looking at agreements that are fairly short-term, but these mining projects take for years, how confident are we that we're going to be around and our commitments are going to be durable?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. And I'd say just real quickly on AGOA, I think we have until September when it's officially kind of comes up again. I know it is actively kind of under review, and so we'll see, kind of where that goes. But, clearly this administration came in with a particular set of views on trade and what it should look like, and so we'll see. I would say the other thing, kind of big picture on this is that the administration also has taken a look at, foreign aid and has, kind of pulled back a lot of that, which impacts how we've talked with Africa. But the theory of the case is really trade, not aid, right? That's what the administration is really kind of focusing on. And by pushing how we can trade with Africa and invest in Africa and encourage appropriate trade balances, then we have a way of going forward. So on this, I would just say that on minerals especially, it is one of the few issues in Washington where you do get kind of bipartisan support from both sides. I mean, Secretary Rubio, when he was still a senator, he co-drafted legislation on minerals with a Democratic counterpart. There's new legislation now, and it always tends to come up with support from both sides of the aisle. So there is recognition of the problem, for sure. And I think everyone recognizes the problem. I think there are some different views about how to solve the problem, but certainly the problem is there. And so I think there will still be interest in this going forward because, again, the rocks are where the rocks are, and you can't really change that. And so I think it will continue to be a priority. Yeah.
I was comforted by President Trump's comment that he invented the idea of America First. I thought it was Charles Lindbergh and Father Coughlin that coined those phrases a few years before that. But we talked a little bit today about, and there are many here from Canada, from Australia, reliable long-term partners that are very active in the mining industry and have a lot to bring to the table. We clearly can't do this alone. So, Gracelin, I'm going to close with the question that I think all of us would like to hear. In an administration that is really pushing for an America First strategy here, what are the prospects of continued collaboration with these reliable partners that we've done business with really since World War II on such a effective manner?
Yeah. Tony, I actually want to go to one point you made earlier about national labs. People don't realize we were the world's biggest rare earths producers until the mid-1990s, and that was all done out of Ames Laboratory. Like, a lot of the many advantages we had as a top producer of things like rare earths and uranium was a direct product of the work we did in our labs that allowed us to have the technical advantage. And when we ceded that in the 90s, when we closed our Bureau of Mines and pulled back some of our funding, is when we lost our advantage. You saw those timelines correlate extremely strongly. Now, to your point about our allies, we have a pretty complicated relationship with some of our allies. I grew up on the Canadian border in Michigan, and you'd forget we were friends, and it's become really interesting. There's been some very hot rhetoric coming out from the former administration about how we're better friends with the Gulf than Canada right now, and it's hard to dispute that statement in a way. But I think at the end of the day, there are a couple things that are worth noting. To Scott's point, the rocks are where the rocks are also some of the lines that a lot of the technical capabilities in mining actually sit in these countries as well. Mining is about 1.5% of our GDP here in the US. It's about 2.5% in Canada. It's 14% of Australia's, right? When you look at the top 12 mine engineering programs in the world, 4 are in Canada, 4 are in Australia. So it's not just, it's partially, Australia is like a periodic table lighting up. But beyond that, it also has a lot of the processing capabilities and technical know-how. I think Mahnaz made the point earlier about, we're going to have to process outside of the United States. At the end of the day, we're not going to process 55 minerals here cost competitively in the next 5 years. What we are going to do is we're going to see the emergence of processing hubs. It's what was announced in Saudi Arabia with developing mine-to-magnet supply chain with MP Materials and Modern. You see Australia, you see Saudis, you see Canada's, America's, and this is really critical because it reduces the amount of permitting, the amount of infrastructure, all of these things that you can't replicate in every country. So at the end of the day, we are going to reduce our reliance not alone from a technical, capital, infrastructure capability, but together.
Well, great. I'm going to close on that note. Mahnaz, Gracelin, and Scott, thanks so much for making the trip and offering our wisdom from Washington. I think we've enlightened the audience somewhat. And the good news is we're around to answer questions if you have them during this coffee break, which is coming right now. So thanks, Jeff, for moderating this, and thank you very much for your time.